All right, guys. Before we start this intro, me and Josh have been on vacation. We were over in the Midwest. We went to Chicago and Wisconsin. So I have an intern. We have an intern, and he decided to leave us just a sweet little intro so that it can kind of help us get back into the groove since it's been so long since we've recorded. So I'll let the intern take it away.
Hello, and welcome back to the We Should Talk More podcast. This is the podcast where two lifelong friends, who don't have much in common, try and get a little bit closer. My name is Cummy Joseph. But you can call me Michael. I was recently hired as John's intern for his various projects, and also for sex. Today we are joined by John Alzate, my very handsome and sexy master. Oh boy, he's so very hot. Sorry about that, got a wee bit carried away. But John is a filmmaker, a writer, a painter, and was recently featured on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Good for him. To the left of him, we have Josh Coronel. How are you doing today, Josh? That's great. I only asked to be polite, I didn't want your life story. Please stop interrupting. Recently, Josh went on a podcast to talk about getting fired. Ha 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 ha. Good night. That got a wee bit
That was it. Thank you, Michael, for that beautiful intro that you prepared for us.
Wow, everyone's out here to get me.
Michael had a lot of issues with you, but that's neither here nor there. Welcome
That's
back.
out of your pocket, right?
Oh yes. But welcome back to the We Should Talk More podcast. Michael already took it away, our intern, but it's the podcast where two lifelong friends who don't have much in common try and get a little bit closer.
And my name is Josh. This is my intern, John.
That's great.
How are you today?
We've been introduced, so we can just cut
today?
into it. I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Thank you for asking.
I just needed to be asked. I needed the redeeming.
Oh, so you only ask to be asked.
Only to be asked.
Interesting. Anyways, we have been off for a little bit. It's good to be back to the routine of recording every Tuesday. I don't know where we're at.
Well, to the listeners, we never left.
That's true. To the listeners, same thing every week.
Content just keeps on coming.
It does.
We haven't stopped. We have taken a vacation, but you continue to have content to consume.
Mm-hmm. And today we're continuing Josh's career story. A very interesting story.
Some might call it a saga, perhaps.
Some might perhaps call it a saga.
I like that word.
And I guess if you have been listening, or if you haven't been listening, there was an episode that Josh did about getting fired from his job over at Wisconsin. Coming from there, he went back to Jersey. And tell us about what you were doing.
Yeah. So when I came back to New Jersey, I actually did not have anything lined up.
Mm-hmm.
I did move in to rent an apartment with a good buddy of mine at the time, and I didn't know what was next. I was not interested to go back into the biomedical engineering field, which is where I have my credentials. That's what I graduated with in college. Now at this point, I'm looking to get a little bit more into programming. My interest has been programming, just from classes I took back in college, and I wanted to find an opportunity to be able to break into that. So I decided to do a data science bootcamp. But one thing that is important to really think about here is, do I really have the money to do this?
Mm-hmm.
I just got fired from a job. I made money from that job. Now I don't have a source of income, and I am still paying bills. So how will I pay for this? So looking at how much money I had at the time of leaving Epic, I I had about $16,000 accessible to me, liquidable cash. So that could sustain across about 8 months. But then you think,
How are you doing that? Just based on like how much you had to pay for rent? Like, how did you get to that?
get an approximate about how much it would be to pay monthly, or what my monthly budget would be.
Mhm.
So that was about like $2,500. If you do the math, 8 months is actually $2,000. So I'm generous with saying 8 months. But around the time when I was living in Wisconsin, I was really only paying $2,000. It does look like my expenditure did go up, or my budget did go up after I moved back to New Jersey when I'm not working. So convenient. So now, with what I expected my budget to be around that time was about $2,000 in 8 months to go out before I would be completely cashless.
Yeah.
So at this point, I wasn't really too clear as to where I was going to get cash. So when I think about when I took their biggest risk, this was probably the biggest risk.
Mm-hmm.
Signing up for the boot camp to do my certification and get training to get a career in data science.
While you still had no income.
While I still had no income. So that is, personally, looking back at the past year, the biggest risk I probably have ever taken. So at this point, that boot camp was to be $10,000. And if you think about that now, that's $10,000 less of $16,000 that might start coming out my pocket.
Mm-hmm.
I was financing it, so I was only paying a small chunk of that at the time of actually going through the classes, and planning to pay like maybe $200, $500 a month after the boot camp ended. Now, keep in mind too, I have yet to mention, is I got fired, so I was eligible to apply for unemployment benefits. Now, unemployment benefits at this time were great. We were looking at an additional $600 from the federal unemployment, and then the $600 that I would just get from New Jersey. So that's about $12,000 a week. $12,000 a week is looking at like close to $5,000 in a month, which is more than what most people are making anyway.
Yeah.
So actually, there wasn't too much to be worried about, and that's why I rationalized doing the boot camp at that time. Now, looking back at it, I did not ever get that unemployment up until October or November, when I applied in April.
What? Oh yeah, I was gonna ask like when you decided to do the boot camp. Then like where in the timeline? When did you start that?
So I applied for unemployment at the end of April,
Mm-hmm.
maybe the week or two after I got fired, and I signed up for the boot camp to start in the beginning of June. So that must have been somewhere in the middle of May I made that decision, or towards the beginning of May. So I already have applied for unemployment, expecting unemployment money to come in. At this point, I had no expectation that it would take 5 to 6 months. I think it was about 4 to 5 months before unemployment finally came in. I had no expectations that it would take that long, but it did. So when I saw that it was to be drawn out that long, I had to seriously consider, well, what am I going to do for money? Because my cash was definitely running low. Realistically, when I looked back at it, if unemployment didn't come in and I didn't take a new job, I wouldn't have had money probably around like November is when I would like be at net zero. So I was really not too stressed at the time in terms of like rushing into a new job, but an opportunity came my way. Our good friend of the show, you know who I'm talking about?
Alex Lago,
His mother, friend of the show,
also friend of the show,
Mrs. Lago. She works at our previous high school, and there was a job opening. Decided that job opening did fall into the experience that I have, technical knowledge, computer science and engineering, that it might be of interest to try. So there was a need for engineering and computer science teacher, and I decided to submit my cover letter and resume. Within like 2 to 3 days, I had a job offer. So there I am now with no I guess important context here for those who aren't familiar. We went to a private high school. And given that it was a private high school, you don't need teaching certifications.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So
it's like realistically at other schools, it probably wouldn't be as easy to get a job offer.
Oh, 100% not. So that's always like an issue. Like you look across like state schools, one of the hardest things is for schools to be able to source talent because there's certain states that don't have enough people who are enough teachers getting certified to work at a school. And so it's hard to really come by like filling a lot of empty roles. Anyway, so there was a need at Roselle Catholic, and so I filled that need, and I took on that responsibility. Now, I guess, what do I want to like start with? Well, with the contract, you have the option to do a 12-month period for pay or 10 months. Because teachers don't teach over the summer. Some choose to get, some people still want to have money coming in over the summer. I think it's a much better decision to always do the 10 months because you just get more money up front. While somebody who is more emotional with their money or weak to see like, oh, high numbers means I have the availability to spend more, can be a vice, but having more money is just more capabilities early on to save and like put money away where it can grow. So I chose the 10 months. And so I just wanted to put that as like additional context here. And I don't know where I wanted to start. So let me pull up my notes real quick, unless you have any questions while I pause.
Did you have any previous teaching experience that you think was useful for the job, or do you think you really had nothing like meaningful going in?
I guess you can say I did, but not teaching experience, or not to nearly the broad scope that you would need for a teaching job, because there's so much more than teaching. What I've done in the past was work as what was called a supplemental instruction peer in college. And this was weekly sessions with students who were needing extra help in their math classes, specifically like algebra to calculus. And they would come in weekly for an hour or so, where they can come in with homework questions and we can review it together, just concepts that they need help with, and we can go over some examples. So it's just supplemental assistance after having like their weekly classes. And it was perhaps a little more where like it's also just assistance with college overall if they need some college advice. So it served as like a mentor type of role in addition to helping out with math. But that was the extent of my teaching experience, which isn't extensive. It's not extensive when it comes to teaching in school. And I'm going to get into that because the responsibilities of teaching are a lot more than what people would tend to think.
What are they?
Great question. How did you come up with that one?
Dead air.
So,
wow.
The responsibilities are, you have to prepare for lessons. You have to be prepared to prepare for lessons. Like 45-minute lessons multiple times a day for different preps, depending on what you have. So important context here that I didn't add in yet was that I was hired to teach, well, I did mention computer science and engineering, but also algebra. And then there was a fourth class that was a half a year class, engineering, that wasn't to be taught until the spring term. So I was considered full-time because I had 4 courses.
You're only doing 3.
But I was only teaching 3 in the first half of the year. So, but the challenging part of this was they were 3 different preps. When I say 3 different preps, 3 different course materials that I have to prepare for. So that is generally a little more than what you'd expect when, say, you come in as a math teacher and you just teach Algebra 2. You're teaching the same content for 4 or 5 different classes. Far easier to do than it is to teach the same content for 3 different classes. But I will say, to be fair, somebody who's teaching 5 different Algebra 2 classes, that's a whole lot more grading. So now you're thinking about grading 20 students times 5. You're going through, you give out a test one week, you have 100 papers to grade.
Yeah.
And 100 is a long, tedious process. You really have to work out a system to be able to get through that efficiently. So that's another huge responsibility right there. A third responsibility is meeting like special needs. There are students who have what's called IEPs, which is a list of things to monitor students with special needs to help assist them with their learning due to like learning disabilities. And so there are times you might have to modify tests for a student. You might have to provide additional time for a student to take a test. There's a ton of different things that they list out on these IEPs that you're supposed to review and be prepared to assist the students with. Otherwise, you're not meeting laws and regulations that was administered by the government. So that's another thing you're supposed to be trained as before you're even a teacher. Then let me see like class management too. You're leading a classroom. You have to be ready to divide out the time in the class in a manner that is within the 45 minutes, and also maintain the classroom that it doesn't get out of hand. Mm-hmm. There can be behavioral issues. Fortunately, like it's a Catholic school, so it's not crazy, but there's definitely been like some behavioral issues I've run into. And then also working with parents. You have to be familiar with how to facilitate conversations with parents, especially parents that might get a little upset. So be ready to resolve some conflicts, because there are plenty that might come your way just because parents get very particular when it comes to the way that you grade their children, and they're worried that you might not be fair across the board. So one thing you have to be like very good at when you're a teacher is keeping records of everything that will demonstrate that you're being fair to everyone. So now that was a lot, but this is me getting hired 1 week before the school year starts with never having done any of that.
Mm-hmm. I didn't realize how close it was to when you got hired before the school semester started. Did you find it difficult to fit in material for the amount of time that they had for class? I feel like that would be something really hard. Not having an idea of how like the flow of a class would go, like teaching. Like, did you feel like you maybe prepared too much or too little for like the amount of time?
Yeah, that was my anxiety starting, but then it tended to be easy to fill in the 45 minutes, and you find that, wow, 45 minutes go by quick.
Yeah.
Just like we realize when we do these podcasts. Mm-hmm.
But does it, I mean, it goes by quick, but do you feel then that like a lot of time was wasted, maybe like you couldn't fill in that time, like
doing something more productive
or like meaningfully, I guess? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. There's always looking back at a day after like a day of teaching. There's definitely things that I would think, well, that didn't go so well. I could have done a better job explaining that concept. So I would try to use that and like adjust for the next day, and be fair and teach better the next day always.
The other thing I wanted to ask, I guess before we go too forward, like at the start of this, what were your thoughts about like that career? Like, did you have any intentions? Like, did you think about it often of like staying there longer, or was it always like this will just be a temporary thing until you finish your boot camp?
So that's exactly what I wanted to get into next. So let's talk about it. One question that I tried to dig into when I prepared for this podcast is, did I want to teach? It's an important question. Walking into the teaching position, we can see that I prefaced this with I needed a source of income, but I also liked it because it helped me learn a lot more about different things that I did want to professionally develop. I get to dive deep into course content that was of interest to me, computer science and engineering. It's particularly computer science with me going into data science at this point. So like understanding the fundamentals that might be skimmed over from a certification program that I was working in or working through. And then also public speaking too. I don't know about you, but I mean, I've definitely have had a lot of anxiety before having to do public speaking for like college classes in the past. And was no better way that I saw than to force myself to have to publicly speak for 45 minutes in front of a class of 20 students at a time. So that was a huge factor. I thought that might help me out a ton. It probably helped me out measurably, but I don't think it like made a drastic difference. Maybe I'm a little less anxious than I was before, but at some point you also just get comfortable with the people that you're speaking in front of because you speak in front of them every day.
Also, do you think it's like easier to like to talk in front of people that like you're their superior? So like there's like that authority kind of already gives you a little bit of confidence.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. So maybe I didn't like sense that the first couple days because it was a new job for me and it was something to get used to. But immediately as a teacher, I get the same type of feeling that I think you would get if perhaps you're like a police officer driving down the road and people are behaving differently because now you're around.
Yeah.
So like immediately as a teacher, if you're in a classroom, students are going to behave differently. As soon as you walk out, and you know this as a student, people start acting stupid.
Yeah. As soon as you leave.
Yeah. Because they always think teachers are out to get you.
Yeah.
Always think that you're watching them and ready to stop them in their tracks with whatever they're doing. So there's a completely different tone as soon as you walk into a room, just as a teacher, and a completely different level of respect than you'd get from anyone else. As a teacher, like, I mean, you get called like Mr. whatever's your last name. So that already like changes the tone of however they approach you and everything in any way that they have conversations with you.
Do you think like that respect is part of it earned? Like, I guess, given like how you establish yourself with a class, because like I'm sure like when they don't know you, that there will be like a level of respect, but if they start to see that you might be like more of a laid back guy, then they'd get a little more comfortable. Or if you're a little tougher, then they'll like realize like, oh, I really have to behave here.
Yeah. So I found myself in an interesting space because I was the youngest teacher at the school, entering in at 24. And so that immediately gave me a level of respect from the students that they wouldn't get from an older person that they felt like was out of touch with their age. So there was that, but I also was very firm. I was a lot more firm than most teachers. Even like the administration would say that, like talking and working with the administration of the school, they liked how firm I was in handling the classroom. They're always all about like making sure that students are disciplined and things like that. Well, like I kind of am on the fence with like some opinions on that. There is reason to have a firm handle of a classroom just so like things are moving along in a efficient way and like they're actually caring to learn. I think I was in an interesting space because I was able to have that toughness in a classroom while also having a level of respect just because I was closer in age to the students. So they were able to still like gain value from the classroom that they may have not gained if they felt like it was somebody who was out of touch with them.
Yeah. I see that for sure. I think even like, do you have any young professors in college? Because I always felt when I had like a younger professor or somebody that sometimes you have professors who are like they just have their masters and like they're still in school, like you feel like the knowledge they have is a little more I don't know.
Interesting?
Yeah, it's just interesting because they also have a sense of like they're still learning the newest stuff instead of someone who's just like settled into a career for so long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's perhaps like the big difference is where as you get older, you take it for granted what people don't know. So being at a younger age, you have just learned to learn the same material that the students are learning. Mm-hmm. Honestly, much of the lesson plans I was prepping were materials that I just retaught myself maybe the night before or the week before if I wasn't up, if I was ahead of the curve. So I'm able to learn it quick just because I've learned this stuff in the past. It's just like refreshing memory sometimes. Sometimes there was new content that I'd never seen in school before. So I had to like think about like, well, if I was to teach myself this as I just taught myself this, how would I explain it to somebody else? So that I think is a lot more valuable than coming from somebody who has learned this and cemented this knowledge 50 years ago. That's an exaggeration perhaps, but like 30 years ago, and now just regurgitating the same content that they've been doing for the past 20 plus years. So I think definitely at that point, like students get a lot more bored and exhausted from a classroom that might come from a sense like that. But yeah, going back into perhaps the question of if I wanted to teach, I think teaching is like a noble profession because of everything that it's requiring, and you get such low pay. People who teach,
you really have to want to teach.
You really have to want to teach. So at this point, when I started teaching, I strongly started considering, do I really want to teach? And there were moments while I was doing it that I genuinely considered it. Given many of the reasons that I just went over, where I'm learning content that I really enjoy, I'm improving my public speaking, and I think there was like one more bullet point that I even put out here to talk about it is the most important one is to possibly like contribute to the world.
You're helping people, yeah.
You're helping people. You're making an impact that's going to be far beyond your time because this is trickling down to generations. So like one thing that I've talked to you about before, and I may have mentioned it on the podcast, I don't think I have, is something I've read from a book by a author called Tom Rath.
Oh, I remember.
Yeah. And it's called It's Not About You. It's not about you. It's a short read. It's a less than an hour read. So if you ever have time, pick it up. It's a good one. Talks about his background and how like he's learned based on his struggles, why it's important to contribute to others and not focus so much on yourself. So while I have this, like, I come across sometimes in the podcast and in our conversations that I do things very selfishly, and sometimes with the motivation of just getting income or increasing my monetary value. While that holds a lot of truth, I strongly consider what contribution I'm making by taking the direction that I'm doing when making money. So I made the huge sacrifice knowing that I came from a job that paid me a lot more in the past to take a huge pay cut. I was still able to negotiate a good salary just because of the need in the classroom. But it was still a significant pay cut from what I was getting before. So at that time, it was a strong consideration. This is something that I might actually want to do. But then there's a lot of things and reasons why you wouldn't want to do this because of the low pay, like the high pressure situation. And then the biggest one that might not be talked about as much is a negative stigma around teaching. This one I half joke about is it lowers your romantic market value. and
Explain that a bit.
Yeah, I will. I've matched with many girls during the time that I was a teacher, right? On Hinge, on Tinder, on Bumble, somehow, sometimes, on occasion, the question would come up, what do you do? So, to be honest and authentic to myself, I would say I'm a high school teacher. After that, 0% rate of responses. I've never gotten a response after that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember you told me that. I find it so strange because I would have thought that it would have the opposite effect. I guess depending on who you're talking to. Because I mean, if you're talking to someone who is maybe more interested in someone who's like a baller or whatever, like, then I guess if they're that shallow, they would just like cut you off. But there is, I mean, I know you were touching on like the negative stigma. Maybe I view it differently, but I guess there are a few people who view teaching as like a noble profession as well. I think maybe it's more so people that know teachers. Like my sister like taught, so like you get a different perspective maybe because like you see that and you're like, oh, you actually are contributing a lot. So like, I wouldn't ghost you if I was a hot girl on Tinder. I mean,
John. That's all I know.
It doesn't speak for everyone else, I guess.
I just need someone like John in my life.
We have to find each other the female versions on Tinder.
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, I'm open to something new.
Okay.
We can cut that part out.
But back to the stigma. What else do you think? How else? What other reactions were you getting?
Perhaps, I mean, I wasn't quite getting too many reactions, but it was also just like an internal pressure of like where you stand in like your social status in life, because you are doing something that you know isn't paying you as much and it's a lot of pressure. So you feel undervalued, and that being undervalued is like very demoralizing. So there has to be like a huge ambition to really want to teach to be able to get through that.
And I guess like some of the teachers that you met while you were there, did you get that vibe from any of them? And I know like it was our high school, so there were a few teachers there that were there when we were there and way before we were there. So like those people that were teaching for so long, did you ever have like a conversation like that?
No, I never was able to comfortably feel like I can have one of those conversations with anyone there. It was always something that I felt may have been more implicit or unspoken. But then also there's the opposite too, where there's people who have decided to settle in teaching because they like it. And it's it's high job security right there, because there's always such a high demand for new teachers. Yeah. There's a high percentage of people. I mean, there's a low percentage of a chance for you to ever get fired.
There wasn't like tenure or anything. That's only like in colleges, right? Like,
there isn't tenure in high school, but it's very unlikely they would fire anyone who was like
for such a long time.
Yeah, there for like 5+ years. Yeah. Like unless they do something that is obscene.
Yeah.
And like to be honest, like there is like a lot to be very careful about as a teacher, because you're working with children, you're working with youth. So there's a lot that they watch out for, and you do have a lot of monitoring above you. Say like you're not supposed to email a student, or you're not to email a student after work hours. And if you do, then always CC administration, just so you always have that as like, hey, you weren't talking one-on-one with a student. You don't want any indication that you could have done anything with any students, because those are legal issues. Those are huge legal issues.
Yeah. And especially for you, like they probably wanted to keep an eye on you. Anyways, there was something I was going to ask. Man, there was a bunch of questions just crossed my mind. One thing, as a former student coming in, because you kind of touched like never having the comfortability with asking, is part of that, or just like through your experience of teaching amongst people that were your teachers, did you ever feel like you escaped like being like, did you feel like you were still a student when you're talking to a colleague, or did it feel like, oh, this is a colleague now instead of my teacher?
No. And I've gotten that question too. I got that question when I was getting interviewed. Actually, that was the big one. It's like, well, I forget how the interviewer asked it, but it was of the line of, how will you handle working with people that you may have considered your superiors? So there is definitely like generation gaps there, and a what you used to have as like a level of respect, and you definitely still sense that like coming in. It's like I don't really want to like give teacher names on the podcast, but say Mr.
You can say what their old like role was.
Well, let's just give a fake name,
Okay.
Mr. Emerson.
Oh no, I'm just saying so I would know who you're talking about. Like if you said, "Oh, our old gym teacher," I would kind of know. Who you're talking
Our old gym teacher. No, I think he was your gym teacher one year, maybe, but he wasn't mine.
Oh, that's right.
He's a parent of a former a classmate of ours, and so it would be very difficult to call him by his first name.
Yeah,
it just felt so uncomfortable.
that's I was thinking of him especially because he went from he's like in vice president now or something, vice principal.
He's the vice principal now.
Yeah, so like a much higher authority in the school, and I think he had that like our last year, so there was a lot of respect given to him. And I even know like not being a teacher, just seeing him as an adult, like still feeling like you meet these people, it's like, oh, I'm back as a freshman, like a scared little kid in front of this like man.
But I will be honest, coming in like first day, I did want to try to set the tone that I wanted to be equal with everyone.
Discard the you being a student.
One of the first questions I asked him is, can I call you so-and-so?
Yeah.
He said, of course.
Wow.
But I do think I've like went back to calling him by his last name on most occasions whenever I interacted with him. The same thing with the principal. There was rarely any occasions I think I ever called the principal by his first name. I know that there's like 3 different vice principals at our high school. One of the other vice principals, the vice principal of academics, she would call him by his abbreviated first name. Or like, what do you call a abbreviated first name? Like Jonathan instead of Jonathan.
I guess a short name or whatever that people get.
Yeah, just a nickname or a preferred name. So she would always call him by his shortened name. Anyway, so yeah, that was one thing. That was an interesting question to try to draw back to where we were before. So I think I guess last thing we were touching on, and just to wrap it up and close the loop, was the negative stigma. So there was a huge negative stigma, and that was a huge pressure for me to like really consider this as a profession long term. And I will be honest, like it was the hardest thing for me to tell people sometimes that I was a high school teacher.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I would prefer to say I was a computer science and engineering teacher and leave it up to their imaginations as to what level.
Wow. I never knew that you felt that way.
I put it on my data naps as computer science or engineering. I think I put computer science teacher. I didn't want to put a high school teacher.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
I think it immediately, like you said, it depends on the person, but it immediately sets a different impression from some people. But like I mean, I'm interested as to like what other people think too.
Yeah,
like if you have any thoughts, like please let me know.
Yeah,
because
in the comments, let us know if you're swiping on an app, you see Josh pop up, computer science teacher. Then you click through his photos. It's okay. Are you swiping on him or not?
And if you see high school teacher, are you more likely or less likely to swipe on him?
Yeah.
So that's the question. Anyway, I really don't want that to be the focus or the reason why I would quit a job like this, because it truly wasn't. There's a lot more that went into it. Now, another huge question is, did I qualify
to be a teacher?
Did I qualify to be a teacher? And that, I mean, we talked about it. Like, I got hired a week before the school year started for 3 different preps with content that I'm familiar with to some degree, but I'm not familiar with how to teach. And I'm not familiar with what the policies are for a school. I'm not familiar with how to grade. I'm not familiar with how to handle a classroom. Not familiar with how to handle behavioral issues.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar how to meet special needs for students. There is a laundry list of things that I haven't gained any qualification from outside of just my technical background.
And do they offer you any like guidance or help during that, or are you just like thrown in? Like, let's say like first day, like
you have everyone around you. You have everyone around you, and it's very easy to go knock on somebody's door and ask for some advice. So I know, I had some like sit down time with like the principal on a few occasions where he was just giving me advice. And that's hard to come by with the principal because he's just such a busy man.
Yeah.
So he kindly offered his time on more than one occasion just to sit down and say like, hey Josh, like this is like how I would go about or approach a situation that you're in right now, given that you might not have the experience or know-how about to handle a classroom. So these are my recommendations and things like that. One of the recommendations, which is what I did take and I did talk about a little bit, is like to be a little more firm starting up because they know you're a new teacher, and students will tend to take advantage of new teachers because they have this familiarity that, oh well, they don't quite know what they're doing, so it's easier to get away with things.
Yeah.
Which is true. Like they could get away with more with me because I'm not as familiar with how to like grade consistently. I'm not as familiar with how to teach a class or any of that stuff. So like one of like the biggest highlights, I guess, or like biggest thing I wanted to say here is like good intentions really only go so far. You have the good intentions of wanting to contribute to the world positively, but they can only go so far without the proper credentials.
Oh yeah, that's pretty good insight.
I wanted to see if I had anything else. Oh yeah. You know what time of like any global perhaps pandemics going on at this time?
I don't think so. Let me know about it.
This was 2020.
You know what? I didn't acknowledge it earlier, but we haven't mentioned that all of this is going on during COVID at all, this whole episode. But I think like if you've been watching, you'd know like where we are in like the timeline. But like we didn't mention like you getting this offer during the pandemic, like starting during the pandemic, and yeah, like you didn't touch on any of
that is true. Like
yeah.
I skimmed over it when I mentioned the unemployment benefit of like the $600.
Yeah, like we just mentioned it, but yeah, that was because of COVID. That wasn't, Josh wasn't special.
Yeah. Anyone who got unemployed during COVID got an additional $600 unemployment benefit. Yeah. So this was a very difficult time for me. Yeah. Trying to figure things out, not only because of losing a job, but it was COVID on top of it.
It's like looking for any other job is like way harder.
It was. There's a lot of companies that just weren't hiring at this time. So yeah, I did fail to mention that, and that's definitely like a huge like part of like my decision, because now with being that it's COVID, there's far fewer distractions and I'm home a lot more, that I spent a lot more time wanting to learn. I spent a lot more time focused to do things that I wanted to do and like figure what I wanted to do out in my life. So that was like a big motivation as to why I ended up doing the data science bootcamp in the first place. Anyway, did you want to add anything to that before I jump back into school?
Well, were you going to touch on, I guess, like the difficulties of teaching?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, so let's do that.
Yeah. So being that it's COVID, we couldn't have 100% capacity at the school. There was a limited capacity where they broke the student body, or like all the students, up into 3 groups. Group A, B, and C. Group A was in the classroom on Monday and Wednesday. Group B would be in the classroom on Tuesday and Thursday. And Group C was always virtual. Any other day that a group isn't in the classroom, they're attending classes from home. So I would have to teach, along with everyone else, for the first time, a hybrid classroom model where you're teaching in front of the camera to students on a virtual call, along with teaching students in front of you in the classroom. So there's so many constraints that adds to teaching. One, just think about something that you might find a little more relatable, teaching for algebra, just trying to use as much real estate on the blackboard. You can't move outside of what the frame of what your camera can show.
Yeah.
Then internet would be a huge issue, especially the first month, because everyone's getting used to teaching virtually for the first time in the school building. think about, well, back in March and April,
Were the
towards
teachers
the
home
end,
too or something?
teachers were home, so they figured out their internet issues at home. Technology issues were probably huge back then for students, especially as to how can we ensure that all the students have the right technology to be able to attend classes at home. Fortunately, at this time, they were giving students laptops. They were, to be honest, like really shitty laptops. So it's not easy for students, and I felt really bad, and I sympathized with students who were working from home, because like most students didn't have their own like desktop or at home built computer tower. Some students did, because like there's a lot of gamers in high school and things. There's a lot of gamers even in this room. Anyway, so some students were set. Other students, they struggled a lot more because of what they had at home.
But as a teacher, what do you think was the most difficult part of that?
Being able to connect with students in person and at home at the same time. It's impossible. And as an engineering teacher, learning how to teach an engineering class that is primarily driven from hands-on projects. There was a lesson plan or a course that the school purchased, which was called Project Lead the Way, PLTW, which was previously only designed for classes that were in person. Come COVID, there were a lot of changes. I don't know how people handled it back in March and going forward from there for the rest of that spring to summertime. But they did restructure over the summer, where they had different ways to accommodate for students that were at home. But it was still like a huge effort to be able to meet that. There were times I would have to ask students who worked virtually to come to school to pick up material just so they can participate in projects that we would do in person. Or there would be an asynchronous classroom now, where one group would follow one lesson plan and the other group would have to follow a different lesson plan, is what an asynchronous model would be now. So that was like double the load on me to try to like manage that. That was extremely difficult for not knowing even how to teach one lesson plan at a time. Now to have to teach 2 to 3 lesson plans at one time. But this was not anything that I was just experiencing. Everyone around me was experiencing a ton of trouble. Fellow teachers were running into so many technology issues. Everyone ran into the internet issue. There was a lot of schools across like different districts were targeted to DDoS targeted, where like their internet was taken down because they found schools to be an easy target because they had to teach a class. Yeah. And we were 100% dependent on that because you needed the internet connection to be able to teach a class now, which was not anything that you could have really interrupted in the past. Classrooms would still be taught whether or not internet was up or down. Now you had to adapt to that. If a class you couldn't teach virtually one day because the internet went down, you had to figure out, well, what are you going to send out to your students to be able to catch up on what may have been missed, or what are you going to have to push back, and then what time are you going to have to catch up? Like, just think about us having to catch up on podcasts just because we're going to go on a vacation for 1 week. We had to catch up on course material because one day the internet went down. So you would run into so many struggles just like that. Everyone experienced that, though. It wasn't just me. So one thing that I found that I was able to positively contribute while I was there was my technical know-how that many older teachers didn't have. So I felt good about that, and like I was happy to be able to help by like going around to other teachers who may have struggled a lot more and being able to like set up a conference call or virtual classroom, like PowerPoint, and other things. I think they figured out PowerPoint by now. Anyway, that was that. Let's see what I had as the next talking point. Unless you have any questions to bounce off of that.
I mean, I was just thinking like all of these like negative circumstances, like I know we haven't really got into it yet with you quitting, but if none of these if like this certain circumstance with COVID making it even more difficult, do you think that would have affected your decision at all with like wanting to leave?
I always like a challenge. So being that it was the challenge was just so high or great at this time, I enjoyed it a lot. And we've talked about this too, of like me just trying to run into high pressure situations just to thrive through it. Other times I fall. As we can see, I got fired. I sank when I was thrown into a deep end at that point in my life. So it doesn't always work out. But I do think I was able to manage this one well. But I definitely had tons of hiccups along the way. Don't get me wrong. There were definitely like issues I had and were brought to my attention even from administration as things like, oh, Josh, you shouldn't do that. Or you should correct the way that you're handling these situations. So I don't think that what significantly contributed to my decision to quit at that point. It was an added stressor, but it wasn't the tipping point.
Gotcha.
So now let's enter December. End of November, I wrapped up my certification. And now I'm coming to this point of, do I truly want to teach, or do I want to take what I've learned from the certification and break into the data practice? And I came to think about all the reasons why I would want to quit and all the reasons why I might enjoy it. We talked about many of the reasons already, but as to how I was feeling at this time, we do realize it took a lot of my time. It took more of my time than it was just from like the waking up at 7 or waking up at 6 and signing off at 2 o'clock. Still had to plan lessons and grade papers that would sometimes go until midnight. So it was very time intensive and stressful.
With also like you were also doing the boot camp, so like that was like added like not having time for
100%
for really anything.
It was a lot to balance at that time. I was able to balance it at some point and like manage everything. I graduated from the boot camp. I was able to finish all my homeworks. I was able to finish all my projects and do well in the class. But it was very stressful. I did start feeling very unhappy during this point in my life. Touching on like the points of how demoralizing it is to be a teacher sometimes, and also just how stressful the situation is. And I also recognize that I qualify for a much higher paying job. So while it's not the motivator for my decision, really, that is definitely a factor that is going to play into it. That money, I am making a sacrifice to teach to when it comes to what I'm making monetarily. And I was also come December thinking about the timing of things. If I don't quit now, then I'm in it for the long run, at least until the end of the school year, because the holidays are approaching. If I was to quit at this time, it gives the school administration some extra bandwidth or extra leg room to be able to find replacements.
Yeah.
And if I was to quit in March, then you'd have to hastily go around trying to do something, or rather just drop the classes if you really can't replace those the demand that was needed. So it became like a ethical issue too, or a moral issue, because one thing is, like, I gave them my commitment to teach. I signed my contract to teach for the year. You can always give 2 weeks notice and leave. You honestly, if you were to up and leave that same day, they wouldn't come after you just because it's such a financial stress and like legal issue that they wouldn't really want to pursue down. But you should strongly consider like the ethics behind it too. Do you really want to ethically leave behind all the students that you have been the role model in like teaching and making an impact in the classroom? Or are you ready to up and go and like say goodbye and like move on with your life to different things. So I selfishly at this point considered what I needed for myself. It was a big mental strain on me. It was challenging for me. I was not in a happy state being a teacher because of all the stresses that it adds. And so I ultimately decided at that point I wasn't going to stick through. We'll talk about like the finance situation in a minute, but come beginning of December, I give my 2 weeks notice. My last day was like that last day of school before the holiday. And that's when I was allowed to tell the students that I was leaving. Before that, you don't want to tell the students because then they won't come to the classroom. Yeah, they won't come. They won't try anymore because they know like, oh, well, Josh is just going to leave tomorrow. So that was like ultimately what it came down to. I just left. I did write a few things here, so I don't know if any of them are things I didn't touch on yet, and they're a little more lengthy. So ask a question or ramble on.
I think we can just skip past it. Guys, I haven't had many dates lately. There's a girl I have a crush on. We went on a couple dates. I don't think she watches this podcast, but if you are watching, I have a crush on you. So,
that's wonderful. Who is it?
I'm just rambling.
Can you give me a 30-second story about this?
I simply don't have time for that. I'm sorry.
Oh, wonderful. I guess here I also mentioned how when evaluating my happiness, I felt I would be a lot more happier like pursuing what I really wanted to pursue at this time. And I made that decision. I didn't want to pursue teaching. So that's to wrap that part up. But also I want to think about now the financial risk that I'm taking because I'm quitting again. Well, not quitting again.
But you're going back to being unemployed.
Yeah, I'm leaving a job with no money.
No job lined up.
And no job lined up. And this time because I'm quitting, you're not eligible. Yeah, you're not eligible for unemployment. So where do I stand? So I didn't mention this yet, but my student loan is paid off. I was able to pay that off when unemployment money came in. And another great, I guess I'll mention it now because I was going to save it for later. Another great thing is come around, I think it was March or around tax season. Joe Biden becomes president and he decided that he would sign into law.
He became president in November, by the way. He didn't become, with the way you frame it, it's like, come around March, he became president. It's like Josh was denying the election until he got the tax.
Until he was inaugurated. No, he got inaugurated in January. Around tax season, I think that it was signed into law that the first $10,000 of unemployment is untaxed. Mm-hmm. So that was great for my bank account being unemployed. So anyway, thank you, Joe Biden. Love you. There's no political discussion on this podcast at all. Just wanted to add that in as to how it made my life easier, not in terms of any political alignment here. But John is
I like Joe Biden.
John is a big Trump supporter. Just to close the conversation there. So I did want to think about the worst case scenario of my financial situation. So to start with how I started before, my liquidable assets at this time was $24,000. This is cash that I have on hand that I can use. Maybe $2,000 in debt, so maybe $22,000. But when I was looking back at the money, it was not easy for me to look at the trends. But anyway, at the time of quitting, my monthly expenses actually was significantly higher given a unfortunate event of my roommate moving out and refusing to pay
I was confused
rent.
For a second.
Yeah. So worst case scenario, I would have to pay an additional $1,000 a month to cover his rent expenses because we didn't have a roommate to replace him at the time.
I'll tell the story.
Go for it, but do it in a respectable way. I'm
Josh's roommate. And I got
that's mean. That's mean.
Wait, I'm doing a voice that's not at all like his.
He really isn't.
I'm Josh's roommate. Oh, you're saying I really isn't? So I was doing his voice just then?
It really wasn't like his voice.
Okay. I'm Josh's roommate, and I'm getting moved with my job to insert state name here to not identify this person. And well, I'm not really gonna look for somebody. I might look a little bit, maybe put an ad on Facebook, but not really try. Oh, Josh, it looks like I gotta leave. See ya. And then I fly over, and come November, December, oh, I'm ghosting Josh whenever he asks me for the rent money. I'm sorry, Josh.
This is too much. This is too much. We'll have to cut back a little bit. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely truth to your impressions, but to be fair, it was a situation that just had to be figured out.
Yeah, and he also was paying. He was paying rent wherever he moved, I guess, right? So like, yeah, he
promised to pay November. He was late on November, unfortunately, and so I was just thinking, what's the worst case scenario with not getting that back anytime, and also having to pay the months going forward.
And how long did you go without having a roommate?
1 month.
It was just that month.
A month and a half or so.
But like at the time of getting fired, you didn't have one.
Yeah.
So at the time of quitting.
Yeah, at the time of quitting, I consciously made the decision that I was going to quit, knowing that I didn't have a job lined up, and knowing that I might potentially have to carry on the additional $1,000. So with $24,000 in my pocket, and having potentially $4,000 a month to pay in expenses, I decided that I would invest $8,000 into an ETF index fund to not touch. That leaves me now with $16,000. I was very confident.
Wait, 16 what you had when you were fired?
No, yeah.
So you left yourself with what you had. That's kind of...
Yeah, so I went back to what I was when I was fired.
Yeah.
But now I do have additional expenses.
Significant, yeah.
I have additional expenses. So instead of like having 8 months of money to spend, I now have only about 4 months.
Wow.
But I come in this situation very confident about securing a new job. And I wasn't going to stop at any... I wasn't going to let anything stop me from getting a new job. I was serious and dedicated to break into the data field coming straight out of the boot camp. I worked hard on my project, worked hard on my assignments, and I was really passionate about getting into it. Now really look at what happened. Good things happened, bad things happened, but more good than bad. So we did, like we already talked about, had a new roommate come in. December, new roommate comes in and he pays for December. My ex-roommate, former roommate, covered November eventually. So now that's totally paid off. I don't have to worry about those expenses. And the new roommate is staying for the remainder of the lease, which is up until the end of April. That's correct. Just wanted to double check myself. And then Joe Biden became president. We already talked about that one. And I chose, and one thing I mentioned earlier was that I chose the 10 months to get paid rather than 12 months. I didn't do that intentionally with the idea to quit, but that did significantly help me out because I ended up making more than I would have if I had the 12 months. So that definitely positively helped my situation out tremendously. But the negative thing that really came out of this was it took a lot longer to get a job than I expected. I was really hoping to turn around and get a new job within like 2 months. I didn't get a job and start my first day until the first week of April. So that was 4 months of no money, 4 months which is I gave myself. Yeah. Exactly.
But you had the roommate.
But I had the roommate, so I did have a little more cushion to not get a job if it came to it. And we also planned a vacation at that time too.
Yeah.
And my stocks were untouched, and it went up to about $10,000. So it's chilling. So it worked out. Things worked out. It was a huge risk. I quit my job, but I did it intentionally, like looking at my money, seeing what was realistic with how long I can go and what I felt confident with in terms of when I can get a job. Now that confidence was more confidence overestimated than it truly was, but it still worked out, and I was able to do it within the time frame that I gave myself of the 4 months to be able to turn out around a job. Now things could have been worse. I know a lot of people who enter or leave a boot camp. This is probably the most I talked about the boot camp on the podcast, that don't end up getting a job or just quit. So many people
they don't pursue data science.
Yeah, or whatever boot camp program that they want.
They quit the boot camp before it finishes.
Yeah, one thing that I did when I maybe we can talk about this as to like the job search itself on one episode. That might be interesting to do, because I've thought so much about it being in this dangerous zone of not having a job, that one thing that I did was I attended a lot of career service workshops, and I connected with a lot of fellow boot campers from various different programs. If I've ever spoke to you on LinkedIn, I've spoke to so many fellow boot campers on LinkedIn. And I would always ask them, like, what is their experience with the boot camp? How did they like it? And what have they gotten out of it? So I've learned through a lot of those conversations that many people have just quit. They made it through the boot camp. They completed all the assignments and projects, but they could never find a job. And that's kind of the tough reality. If you're not persistent coming out of a boot camp and like truly want to break into the field, or you have other priorities that are distracting you, people will tend to just stay with their day job.
Yeah. And I guess like for anything like that, like any like boot camp or even like grad school type thing, like it's not a guaranteed thing to get you a job. Like I think there might be like a thought of that, like getting any further education or certification. It just like it might help you get your foot in the door, but it's not gonna like just get you a job right after.
Yeah, there's no guarantee anywhere in their clause that you're going to get a job. It ends up coming to you, and it comes to how much time you want to put in. And if you're going to stay persistent throughout it, that's the key part. If you decide that, I'm going to work 10 hours one night and then never work again for the rest of the week to work at getting a new job, it's not going to work out. It clearly, you could work much more than 10 hours across the week if you divide that up across the 7 days of the week. So, it's going to be very important that you remain persistent and don't get demoralized, because it's easy in those situations where you're seeing that no one else is getting a job around you. A lot of other people are struggling, which I was seeing a lot, having networked with so many other fellow boot campers, that why continue if there's no light at the end of the tunnel? So it does work out if you like continue at it and you keep trying. And there's many success stories out there. And that was always what kept me at it. Like there was a beautiful article. Maybe I'll try to source it and like send it to you so we can include it in the show notes, where this one person coming out of App Academy, which is a program over in San Francisco and New York for web development, he immediately after the program started working for the boot camp, where he was working as a TA for the classes. But he was doing that with the intent of continuing to apply for jobs, right? And he secured a few jobs, not low income, but like about median income, about like $60,000. But this is also thinking about San Francisco wages. And then he secured a job with Yelp. Once he secured that job with Yelp, which was breaking six figures, all these other companies started coming after him. You can get one offer or a few offers right off the bat. But if you don't have like that job security to help keep you persistent with your job search, or at least income security and cushion to keep you persistent with your job search, there's so much that might come come after getting your first job offer. There's a trend that you'll see through a ton of different stories where people who continue to do job offers over a span of like 4 months or so, the first offer is going to start around like $60,000. It's not going to, but it has started for many people like around like $60,000, then 80,000, 100,000. Then you get something like Yelp, and then you get something like Google, which was the next one that he got. And then you get Airbnb, which previously rejected him, coming back saying, oh, actually, this candidate might be worth it because now Google is willing to hire him. We might be, we may have let him slip through the cracks. Let's reconsider him. They reconsider him and offer him over $200,000. And now he's at this position of, well, do I want to go with Google for the title because Google's Google will always, like, if you have Google on your resume, you're set for life. Or will I go with Airbnb, which was a little less known at this time, but getting a lot of seed funding because of being a startup, that there might be good growth here. And they're paying more. Then he comes back to, maybe he had the higher offer from Google at this time, but I think he went back to Airbnb saying, can I get $250,000, which was like $30,000 more than what he was getting from the other job offer at this time, or from their last offer that they gave him, which was a huge one. But he was persistent on negotiating because, like, he's been teaching as a TA to all his mentees the value of negotiation. And so he came into this position of, well, like, I'm already at such a high salary, I just have to now choose between the two. But he went ahead and negotiated, and he was able to secure an even higher offer. So, like, these stories, reading this, the point of this all is, like, I would read these stories, I'll talk to people, I'll network with people. It was demoralizing, but I would read these stories, and, like, it would be a huge inspiration for me to continue along my journey and, like, not give up. One other point that I wanted to close off with too was, I noticed when talking with a lot of other boot campers was that they, and I mentioned this briefly already, that they would continue on with just their 9 to 5 that they were already working at with their whatever they did before, and eventually fall off the bandwagon of ever considering to break into data science and let the certification go to waste. That could have easily have happened to me if I stayed teaching until the end of the year and not have decided to quit halfway through the year. I would have been so far gone from the skills that I acquired that it would have been a lot more work to be able to pick it back up and like continue at the job search. So, like, in retrospect, I'm really happy I made the decision to quit my job. While, like, I've made huge sacrifices that were selfish, it would have been a huge negative impact on my, like, personal happiness. And one thing that is extremely valuable that everyone should strongly consider is your own mental health and your own happiness. And so, like, I'll leave it at that for my story, and, like, close it off with that.
Oh, that's such a cute ending.
Thank you.
all men should go to therapy. That's all I have to say.
I agree.
No, but that's beautiful. And also, like, even though it can be viewed selfishly, I think you made the best decision. Also, given, like, you could have waited, like, longer and then just, like, quit on the school, and then that would have, like, screwed them over. And you want to, I think, in whatever career you're doing, if you're not happy, like, that'll reflect in the work that you do too. So, like, if you end up becoming, like, really unhappy in what you're doing, you're not really, like, yes, as a teacher, you can really impact people, but if you're, like, unhappy, you're not going to impact people as much as you could if you were really, like, there for that reason, you know? So,
yeah, that's very
you
true.
saved a lot of students, like, the pain of having a really shitty teacher.
No, I will say, being a teacher, it was the students that kind of helped, like, get you through it.
Yeah.
Knowing that you're teaching the generations that are to come.
Sorry, guys, I had to cut something out. Accidentally said something I was supposed to. But a beautiful ending to a beautiful podcast. Listen to Josh's advice. Take risks with reason, but also prioritize your happiness. because your happiness will reflect in everything that you do. And yeah, this was all really interesting, and a lot of stuff that I really didn't know, stuff that you were thinking about and experiences that you were going through.
Yeah, I'm so happy we were able to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm so glad we were able to talk more about it.
So I'm Josh.
I'm John. No outro from the intern. I think he got fired.
He sure did get fired after that one.
But we might have something else. We might have someone else do it for us. If you guys are listening, if you have any insights on a guest that we can have on, anyone that you think that we should talk to, let us know. We're looking for a guest.
Yeah, and you can reach us at shouldtalkmore.com. You can find our contact information there. And definitely email us.
Yeah, we're interviewing for a replacement co-host. Anyways,
I wonder who it is.
My name is John Alzate. And did you already say your name?
I did. My name is Josh, but I'll say it again. I love you guys.
Yeah, I love you guys. We don't really have anything going on. You know what? We are going on a date.
Did you ask me out yet?
Yup.
Where are we going?
I'll see you guys.
I'll think about it.